Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on January 26, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Before we get into this week's Astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution, and that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern on most major podcast platforms. That's a mouthful. Major podcast platforms. I think it's the first time I've had that problem, no? Anyway, but if you listen to this podcast at karmicevolution.com, you'll see a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest, one of my mentors, about what each of us, depending on our sun sign, actually needs to be happy. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some words of astrological wisdom. In addition, if you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose and what may be holding you back from achieving your highest destiny in this lifetime, I offer still a 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, a discounted rate that's for podcast listeners only. So if you feel stuck, frustrated, or otherwise stymied in your relationships, your career, or other areas of concern, and you want to learn why, this reading is for you. If you'd like to understand how, by letting your unconscious script based on old soul-conditioned behaviors from the past run the show, and now you want to become more conscious about how to change this script up going forward, then this reading is for you. And if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, then this reading is definitely for you. Conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of my special discounted offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. Bear in mind, it's important for an astrologer to look at your birth chart, also known as your natal chart, as a soul map for your life's journey. In that sense, this reading is not about what's going to happen, but rather it's a look back at the past to help you understand how you arrived at where you are today and what changes might be necessary in terms of your beliefs and your opinions and your perspectives in order to find greater happiness in whatever areas of life are most problematic for you now. It's only when you understand this basic soul map that you can proceed to better understand what path the universe is calling you to follow now through the transits and progressions, and whether this involves making or adjusting to major changes in your life. That, sometimes sometimes things happen, right? We have deaths, we have losses of jobs, we have financial crises, etc. Those are the things that we may or may not think are related to our past and and the decisions that we may have made. And in other cases, we adjust to the things that we may have made decisions about, but then later find they weren't the best decisions for us. So any of these things can cause major changes in your life that, ultimately serve your highest soul purpose. So again, the Karmic Evolution Natal Insight Reading Special offer, 75 minutes for $125, will enable you to form a foundational basis to become conscious of what your life's purpose really is all about. It's only after that that you can go on to look at transits and progressions to see where you're at now and which way to turn, left or right, keep going straight, turn around in terms of your soul path for the future. And again, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of this special offer, which you can easily find at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. All right, so let's get to this week's Astro News you can use. We just experienced the Leo full moon yesterday on January 25th at 9:54 a.m. Pacific and 12:54 p.m. Eastern Time, little over 24 hours ago, at 5 degrees and 15 minutes of the Leo-Aquarius polarity. That means the Leo moon opposed the Aquarius Sun, reflecting the sun's light back onto itself in order to reveal its shadow side nature. We may recall that the sun met Pluto at the tail end of Capricorn, 2959 degrees of Capricorn to be exact, on January 20th, before both the sun and Pluto moved into Aquarius a little later on the same day. So both the sun and Pluto were in Capricorn at the beginning of the 2024 U.S. presidential election season when Iowa held its first primary on January 15th, and that happened as the January 11th Capricorn new moon was waxing and approaching its first quarter lunar square of the Aries moon to the Capricorn Sun on January 17th. Now the sun's move into Aquarius, representing more of a group-oriented energy, was then followed by the New Hampshire primary on January 23rd, just this past week, which happens to be the same day that Venus entered Capricorn, which is an energy of duty and responsibility versus pleasure, especially around the concept of partnerships. And Venus, once she entered Capricorn, joined Mercury and Mars, who are already in that sign. Now, Venus and Saturn rule Capricorn, often wants to remain partnered with and thus values the traditional past. The Iowan GOP voting population, who gave Donald Trump the GOP nomination by beating Nikki Haley, was made up of a high percentage of evangelical Christians. So, in terms of the sun still being in Capricorn, I think that that group, particularly those who encapsulated the evangelical Christians, are basically more rigidly aligned with the traditional past, right? But as as Venus moved towards Aquarius, as you know me, guys, as Venus moved towards entering Capricorn, and we hit the New Hampshire caucuses or primary elections, when the Sun and Pluto had both already moved into Aquarius, and even though Trump won the majority of votes in New Hampshire, as he did in Iowa, to win the GOP primaries in both states, Haley nevertheless drew a lot of independents and a few Democrats, since New Hampshire allows them to vote in the GOP primary. I was watching the news that night, and I was pretty amazed to find that you could, in New Hampshire, walk into the polling place and declare yourself a Republican, even if you were a Democrat or an independent, vote, and then on your way out, undeclare yourself Republican and go back to whatever you were before. So I'm not really sure if that means you could do that if you were already registered for the Democratic Party or not, but it's pretty interesting, right? Anyway, Aquarius where the Sun and Pluto now reside, is a fixed air sign, and it represents communication, just as do the archetypal signs of Gemini and Libra. But it's communication when it's in Aquarius with those who are like-minded. So the Aquarian archetype represents friends and groups. And over time, as we're called to individuate or become who we really came here to be, it's the Aquarian archetype that can either help keep us aligned with groups, such as our family or other organizations, be they business, political, religious, community, or humanitarian oriented, or ask us to break away from such alignments. Now, the true Aquarian archetype, contrary to what a lot of people think, is not about it being easy to break away from groups, but rather the difficulty involved in breaking away from such groups, especially when we share the same ideologies. But if over time our individuation process leads us to develop different ideas from that of our group of origin, again, say our family or our church, for example, then part of our Aquarian mission is to break from such groups and become an independent thinker. Doing so, however, may lead us to join different groups, ones whose members agree with our newfound ideology. The nature of much of this journey depends on each individual's specific natal or birth chart, which charts the course we all need to take in terms of finding our quote-unquote tribe, or those, be they individual friends or others aligned with a particular group or groups, with whom we feel the greatest sense of acceptance and kinship. The Aquarian archetype thus sets up more of an us versus them energy than does Capricorn, from which, it moves on, right? Which Capricorn simply favors, often out of fear of the unknown and a sense of caution, following a more rigidly traditional, less progressive or future-oriented path. This is part of the reason why the Uranus-ruled Aquarian archetype is associated with revolution. One has to revolt against the accepted norms of its group of origin in order to express freely one's thoughts and beliefs without fear of being censored, isolated, or outright shunned. Once that's accomplished, one is free to do one's own thing, as they used to say in the 1960s. So for the next month, while the Sun transits through the sign of Aquarius until it enters Pisces on February 18th, we're all called to do our own thing in terms of freedom of expression, to join with like-minded friends and groups, or to go it alone. This streak of independence may prove liberating or cause problems by challenging us to walk our talk to prove we stand by our beliefs, no matter how different from our current partners or groups they are. So at yesterday's Leo full moon, the Leo moon reminded the Aquarius Sun that it has choices to remain attached to one side or the other. Again, us or them. Which do you choose? The issue of needing to make a choice becomes obvious because collective energy coalesces now around the transiting karmic Libra South Node and the Aries North Node, which ask us whether we want to continue to go along to get along, remain part of a partnership, whether that be with a particular individual or individuals or an entire group, or if we want to separate from the partnership. At first, that would mean individualizing ourselves out of any kind of group think. Later, it could mean in correspondence with both the longer-term emphasis on the Aries North Node as the way of the future and the microcosm of the energy of this month's Leo full moon, that moving away from a group can allow us to become a leader. Politically speaking, at least here in the United States and in places like Taiwan, for example, and soon in numerous countries around the globe, which I mentioned last week will vote in new leaders during the course of the year 2024, we may well see many new leaderships emerge. Whether since Pluto remains now in Aquarius until September 1st, when it retrogrades back into Capricorn, and then re-enters Aquarius on November 19th, our U.S. presidential election will see us remain stuck with leadership representative of past conservative values, or will it move us into more progressively future-oriented ones, which either or remains still to be seen, right? However, one message of the Leo full moon seems clear at this point. That is that a leader had to break away from the pack in order for others to follow him or her. Leo, the moon in Leo, as I said, reflecting the light of the sun back to itself, is telling the sun, get away from the group, do your own thing, become your own creative solar individual. You know, it's just basically screaming at the sun, individuate, stop being a sheeple, right? Stop saying, well, I guess we have my mother's voting for this one or that one, and my husband, oh, I always vote with my husband, you know, or whatever. Okay, sorry, I'm digressing. Those of us of a certain generation probably could relate to that. Maybe not so much the younger people, but either way. So in terms of a leader breaking away from the pack and individuating, this is essentially symbolically what Donald Trump has done thus far in both Iowa and New Hampshire in terms of reflecting the energies of this lunation. It doesn't say that he's going to win the general election on November 5th. Rather, it indicates that for now, he's leading the pack. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley has vowed, despite her GOP primary losses in both Iowa and New Hampshire, that she will continue to fight on. Curious, I took a quick look at her chart, for which, unfortunately, we have no birth time. Born January 20th, 1972 in Bamberg, South Carolina, Haley has a 29 minute, I'm sorry, 29. I often get consumed with making sure I get all the information in before the end of the show. So apparently I'm falling over my words today. Anyway, Haley has a 29-degree, 44-minute Capricorn Sun. Okay, does that degree ring a bell? Well, it should, since it was pretty tightly conjoined by the recent January 20th Sun-Pluto conjunction that I mentioned earlier at 29 degrees and 59 minutes of Capricorn. And not only that, but like Donald Trump, Haley's Sun conjoins her 5-degree, it conjoins her North Node, and she has a 5-degree, 35-minute Aquarius mean North Node. And Trump, you may recall, although he has a 22-degree, 55-minute Sun conjunct the North Node at 20 degrees, 45 minutes of Gemini, he also has the Sun, Gemini Sun and the North Node conjoined to transiting Uranus at that time of his birth at 17 degrees and 53 minutes. So Haley's nodal axis is 5 degrees and 35 minutes Leo South Node opposite the 5-degree, 35-minute Aquarius North Node. We don't know what houses the nodal axis resides in because we, again, have no birth time. But I thought it was really interesting because likewise for Mike Johnson, the current Speaker of the House of Representatives, whose chart I delineated in great detail recently on this podcast, though we also have no birth time for him, we do know that he has a 5-degree, 3-minute South Node in Leo and a North Node in Aquarius. So both he and Haley were hit by the lunar eclipse, which occurred at 5 degrees and 9 minutes of Taurus, when it squared their nodal axes on October 28th of last year. So let's revisit now the theme of that eclipse series, which combined with the solar eclipse of October 14th at 21 degrees and 8 minutes of Libra, which as per Bernadette Brady in her book Predictive Astrology, that eclipse series from last October is defined by, and here I quote from her book, The immense power, anger, and force of the Mars square Pluto, which is channeled into this family of eclipses via the trine, mean the individual experiencing this series will find that huge obstacles will suddenly and easily clear, or on the negative side, a pending potential crisis will suddenly manifest and move through his or her life very rapidly. Either way, the individual will feel that everything is moving at great speed. And according to Politico, on October 16th of last year, just 12 days or so before that eclipse, and I quote here, "After months of parsing polls and debate performances, we've got some fresh data on the state of the 2024 presidential race. The latest Federal Election Commission reports offer a revealing look at the financial vigor of the various Republican campaigns, letting us see who's minting money and who's sputtering. The quarterly filings also underscore an emerging campaign storyline. Nikki Haley is on a trajectory to become the Trump alternative. Former President Donald Trump remains dominant in polling and in fundraising, but the new FEC reports and recent polling reveal the former South Carolina governor and ambassador's momentum, which began after a strong performance in the first GOP debate in June. And on October 30th, 2 days after the eclipse, Haley filed to be on the South Carolina presidential primary ballot. Meanwhile, that Sun-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn on January 20th of this year was preceded on November 28th by the New York Times announcement that the Koch network endorses Nikki Haley in bid to push GOP past Trump. That's the headline. And the article goes on to say the support will give Ms. Haley more organizational strength in the field as she battles Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida for the number 2 spot in the Republican presidential race. The political network, founded by the billionaire industrialist brothers Charles and David Koch, has endorsed Nikki Haley in the Republican presidential nominating contest, giving her organizational muscle and financial heft as she battles Governor Ron DeSantis, again in Florida, to become the top rival to President Donald J. Trump. And it continues the commitment by the network, Americans for Prosperity Action, that's their PAC, bolsters Ms. Haley as the campaign enters the final 7 weeks before the Iowa caucuses. Since the first Republican primary debate, Ms. Haley has steadily climbed in the polls, even as Mr. DeSantis has slipped, and Trump remains the dominant frontrunner in the race. So we all know that Ron DeSantis dropped out right before the New Hampshire primary, the night before, and so it would seem that this eclipse was pretty prescient, no? And on in terms of Mike Johnson, on October 25th, again 3 days before the eclipse, Mike Johnson became the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Whether he was chosen by God or not is another matter, but we can see that this eclipse apparently did clear some obstacles for him, no? Since then, he's also managed to get 2 continuing resolutions to extend discussions to fund the U.S. government until March 1st and 8th at this point. It's not only to, it's extension to the discussions to pass the actual legislation by those dates. So, see how astrology works? Now, the interesting thing is we do not know the end results, right? Because while we don't have either of their ascendants, we can't set the wheel with their houses and place the planets and the nodes into houses, which would give us at least 50% more information. However, we do know that October 28th eclipse squared their nodal axis from one side. And on and the upcoming set of eclipses for 2024, we have the, hang on. We have the March 25th lunar eclipse, which will happen at 5 degrees and 7 minutes of Libra, and the April 8th solar eclipse at 1924 Aries. So what's interesting here to note is that I use astrologer Ronnie Dreyer's teachings about sensitized eclipse degrees, and how when the eclipse degrees hit the natal node, well, when the eclipse degree, if the eclipse degree is before the natal nodes, in other words, if the natal node is like on October 28th, it was at 5 degrees, like we said, of Taurus, and the nodes were not yet regressed back to that point, which they were not, then they're coming to that point, as we progress. So we will find that the energy of the eclipse will start either at the eclipse, if the eclipse degree is before the nodal degree hits it, and culminate roughly at the eclipse, or the opposite, where the energy and the themes of the eclipse will start to become prevalent when the nodal degree is hit, and then after that it hits the chart, Okay, let me clarify that and apologize because I misspoke. So on October 28th of 2023, the true node was at 2454. That's the Libra 2454 South Node and Aries 2454 North Node. And the eclipse degree on that day was 5 degrees and 9 minutes of Taurus. So the eclipse degree had not been reached yet by the transiting nodes, which are always retrograde, except for very brief periods of time. So between the time that the eclipse occurred, when the nodal degrees were 2454, yet the eclipse was at 5, this particular one was at 509, that's the energy that squared both Mike Johnson's and Nikki Haley's nodal axis. Okay, so I want to make that clear. Those degrees of first 5 degrees Taurus and 9 minutes of 5 degrees and 9 minutes of Taurus, and the upcoming lunar eclipse on March 25th at 5 degrees Libra at 7 minutes. The October 28th squared their nodal axis, and the March 25th will trine their nodal axis. Meanwhile, it's not until I'm just looking this up as I'm talking, between November 19th and 20th, which just happens to be also the same days that Pluto enters Aquarius for the next 20 years, the nodal axis will be on between 5 degrees and 10 minutes of Aries and North Node Aries and South Node Libra. So the South Node on November 19th or 20th is going to trine both Mike Johnson's and Nikki Haley's North Node. That is what I'm trying to say. So and I'm sorry, I sound a little hesitant because I think I made a miscalculation because I was saying that originally that the Taurus lunar eclipse from October 28th squared their nodal axis, which it did, but also that the upcoming eclipse at 5 degrees of Libra would square it from the other side, and that is not actually factually accurate. So I apologize. It will trine instead. So it's kind of interesting to look at this because one of the things that I've, been contemplating is the fact that Nikki Haley, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on right now with they're parsing the statistics, right? In Iowa, Trump got the most votes, and it was, whatever to whatever, and then 55 to or 6 to 44 with Haley in New Hampshire. That's not exactly accurate, but in that ballpark, right? But what happens if he ends up getting convicted? What happens if, for example, something causes him to drop out of the race? Now, that's a long shot, I'll grant you, but it's just interesting to contemplate, because if Haley is now undisputably the number 2 GOP primary candidate, I don't know how it works politically, but even if she were to, say, go through the South Carolina primary, because there's 2 primaries still between now. There's a Nevada primary, which is soon, and I think it's February 5th or something like that, and then the February 24th South Carolina primary. And while she may be expecting to do well there, a lot of the pundits do not expect that to be the case, and instead believe that Donald Trump will win the nominee there. But what about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months later, prior to the actual November 5th, 2024 presidential election? What if something happens to the candidate? I have no idea how the GOP handles it politically, but if they go back to the second runner-up, which would be Haley, right? So given the trines that I'm talking about, and that's not, of course, the only thing, I do think that she has a natal 29-degree Capricorn Sun Pluto conjunction in her chart. Remember, Pluto's about money, right? And then that exactly on January 20th, which is her birthday, right? That the Sun can join Pluto again in that sign, which actually only happens like at once. I don't know. I think they said it happens only once every 240 years. It has to do with the Pluto cycle. But if that's the case, then this is really a big deal, and how the other eclipse that squared her nodal axis resulted in her getting all this money to continue her campaign. So anyway, to go back to the Leo full moon, which is a little more than 24 hours ago, we note that Mercury and Mars in Capricorn was waxing into squares also to the nodal axis. And Mercury, which is about communication and also about siblings, and in terms of being related to siblings, particularly twins, represents duality, which is an ancient concept that brings to the fore brother and sisterhood, dark and light, good and evil, etc. Now, Mars in Capricorn, as I mentioned on a previous podcast, is known as the general, primarily because Saturn ruled Capricorn is goal and achievement oriented, while Mars is action. So Mars in Capricorn prefers a plan instead of going off half-cocked, as I think I said already in a different podcast, my dad used to say. Now, this combination of Mercury and Mars, as they can join on January 27th, tomorrow, is like the general giving orders that are communicated via the messenger. So we know also that Mars squared wounded healer Chiron in Aries exact at this lunation yesterday as well, and Mercury followed him with a square of his own to Chiron earlier today on January 26th. These waxing squares of both Mars and Mercury occur also as transiting Chiron in Aries is headed toward a conjunction with the Aries North Node. That will occur first if we're looking at the true node at 16 degrees and 45 minutes of Aries on February 20th, or if we're looking at the mean North Node and Chiron on March 5th at 17 degrees 27 Aries. We might, just for fun, want to average out the two and say maybe February 27th will be the strongest or most impactful day, which is just a thought. But I'm switching topics now off of the U.S. presidential election and going to revert to the current situation in Gaza, which undoubtedly lends itself to bringing in the brotherhood sisterhood theme as it relates to Mercury and Mars and their squares to the nodes and Chiron. Both sides, Israel and Gazans, or Hamas, are clearly fighting over land and who will lead the future of Gaza's 2.1 million population. As of yesterday, almost exactly at the time of the Leo full moon, news broke that President Biden was sending U.S. CIA Director William Burns to Qatar to help negotiate a ceasefire hostage release deal. Now, this follows the hullabaloo caused in the Israeli Knesset earlier this past week when hostages' family members infiltrated proceedings there, shouting angrily and expressing their displeasure with Netanyahu and his right-wing and government cohorts' resistance to resuming active hostage negotiations. So according to ABC News on January 22nd, 2 days after the Sun and Pluto both entered Aquarius, and I quote, relatives of Israeli hostages being held by militants in the Gaza Strip stormed Israel's parliament, the Knesset, in Jerusalem on Monday in protest of the government's failure to bring their loved ones home. You will not sit here while our children die, some of the family members yelled while disrupting a finance committee hearing. And on January 25th, as per Reuters, the quote again, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency Director William Burns and his Israeli counterpart will meet with Qatari officials, I don't know if it's Qatari officials in coming days for talks on a second potential Gaza hostage deal, three sources familiar with the matter told Reuters on Thursday. Burns, which was yesterday, Burns and the head of Israel's Mossad intelligence service, David Barnea, will meet with the Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister in Europe this weekend, one official briefed on the meeting told Reuters. Now, Netanyahu is drawing increased scorn both domestically and internationally since he's replied angrily to this news that he doesn't consider those brokering this negotiation or potential negotiation, meaning in particular the Qataris, as legitimate partners. And this kind of behavior becomes more relevant when we realize that the post-Leo full moon waning portion of this month's lunar cycle can allow us to release the tendency to remain loyal only to the friends and groups with which we've previously been associating. You know, in the case of Netanyahu, only with his right-wing ultra-religious cohorts both in and out of government, or we can follow the Aries North Node and choose a different course, which would be, in essence, although this is a judgment, I will agree, to be a true leader. And we can do that with the help of the Leo full moon's fixed square to Jupiter and Taurus if we play our cards right. This is an aspect that can either mar our plans by keeping us stuck in the Libra South Node's past behavior of, again, going along to get along or of being indecisive. And remember, no decision is a decision. And that decision is no. Because if you don't make a decision, you're not doing anything, you're not taking a stand one way or another. So, it's no, you know, can you move? I don't know. Well, if you're not going to move, then the answer is no, right? Or we can move toward choosing a different path from the status quo, as mentioned. Now, Jupiter in Taurus is an expansion of consciousness around what is it that our soul truly values versus what we think we need, especially in terms of material stuff. And we know Jupiter's currently moving forward again, so he's direct, not retrograde. And Jupiter has a way of giving us not what we want, but rather what our soul needs to grow in consciousness about our true mission and purpose here on terra firma. And since changemaker Uranus has been going through Taurus, the sign of stubborn resistance to change, since 2018, and will remain there until July 7th of 2025 when he'll first dip his toe into Gemini, though he will retrograde back into Taurus between November 18th of 2025 and April 17th of 2026, after which he'll remain in Gemini for the next 7 years. And as I've mentioned numerous times before, society's values have changed drastically since 2018, particularly as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in many, many different ways. So at this lunation, The Aquarius moon squared Jupiter in Taurus, but the Leo sun won't perfect its exact square until later tonight on January 26th. Both of these aspects ask us to curb any over-optimism about integrating the tensions inherent in this energy. If we apply this to, say, the U.S. GOP primaries we just experienced, the Leo full moon has resulted in a leader emerging for the time being, as I noted, but its square to Jupiter cautions us not to get carried away by believing this is the current winner who will eventually, but believing it is the current winner who will eventually take all. And given the current cardinal squares of Mars to Mercury in Capricorn to Chiron in Aries, and the Libra-Aries nodal axis, we're being presented with the ability to resolve any tension between holding on to an old set of values, read ideologies, beliefs, be they political, religious, social, or what have you, in order to make room for the new set that has been taking place over the past few years. They've been starting to gel, over the past few years. And it's these newer values, thanks in large part to not only Uranus and Taurus, but also Saturn's transit through Aquarius, which occurred from March 22nd of 2020 to March 7th of 2023, that will guide us toward whatever societal or personal changes need to be made. As I just mentioned and have mentioned before, our values have clearly changed and will continue to change still, not only in the U.S., but around the world. Uranus knows that change is the only constant. Taurus knows that values emanate from the true wisdom of the soul, not from decisions of what's worthy of our love or admiration based on empirical calculations only. Aquarius knows that for some, it's about going it alone versus breaking away from groupthink, while for others it's about finding our true tribe. So late today on January 26th or early tomorrow, January 27th, depending on your time zone here in the U.S., Uranus will station direct at 19 degrees and 5 minutes of Taurus. What does this mean? Well, Uranus retrogrades for approximately 5 months out of each year. The planet of expected change stationed retrograde on August 28th, 2023 at 23 degrees and 5 minutes of Taurus and has moved back 4 degrees since. Uranus retrograde, quote, makes us conscious of imperfection, according to Jungian astrologer Erin Sullivan in her Retrograde Planets book. And again, I quote, this can be shocking when we have lived quite happily with an attitude, a person, or a social situation for years and never really felt any discontent or need for change, Sullivan writes. Uranus awakens our dissatisfaction with that which is superficial, rote, habitual, or based on sheer animal survival instinct. The elitism of Uranus has the power to suddenly reveal a relationship or lifestyle as being false, pretentious, or sordid, whereas before it has been perfectly suitable. The wonder of it all is that it never before appeared to be so. It is perception that has shifted, rather than the reality. End quote. And I find it most interesting to note then that on August 14th, 2023, Georgia Attorney General Fani Willis, quote, used Georgia's racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations, or RICO law, to charge Trump and 18 associates for allegedly participating in a wide-ranging conspiracy to overturn the state's 2020 election results, according to the Associated Press at that time. Well, would you look at that? Sullivan adds, quote, it is particularly important to use the retrograde phase of Uranus's transit to test what has lasting value and what is merely potential with no containment. Uranus shatters smug ideals which will not withstand true objective clarity. So again, whether we want to count someone like Haley out of the presidential election or not, given that the leader of the pack thus far is Trump, and given how Uranus is stationed direct, may continue to reveal more about how Trump hides behind an apocryphal facade of smoke and mirrors about being a successful businessman, as Uranus begins to pick up speed, what happens to the GOP? Like I said, presidential nominee, for example, if Trump does get convicted prior to the November 5th election. And now I want to mention, too, a word about the upcoming solar eclipse on April 8th at 19 degrees and 24 minutes of Aries. And according to what I was just saying before, the nodes at that time, okay, again, not at that time, the nodal axis hit 19 degrees and 24 minutes of the Libra South Node, Aries North Node, circa January 21st of this year, a mere 4 days ago. And therefore, this is when the energy of the eclipse, according to Ronnie Dreyer, whose teachings on sensitized eclipse degrees I really feel has a lot of validity, will begin. So in other words, the upcoming set of eclipses, but particularly the solar eclipse, is already in progress. Okay? So the lunar eclipse from March 21st, which is actually 2 weeks earlier than the solar eclipse on April 8th, is not going to manifest, as I said. It'll conclude when the lunar nodes hit that degree in the future. But I wanted to explain that we can at least observe in our own lives, but more specifically through the collective, right? That the energy of the April 8th 19 degree 24 minute Aries eclipse is already in its nascent stages, begins around now. And so this is the theme of that eclipse. And again, this is according to Bernadette Brady. She says that the new moon... No, that's not right. Hold on. Is this... Hang on. I thought it was so together for this show, but apparently not. Oh well. Hopefully enough of what I've said has enough resonance to be logical enough to be understood. Okay, this is 8 North. So what Bernadette Brady writes is the new moon squares Uranus and is also on the midpoint of Mercury-Venus. Pluto holds a powerful position as it occupies the midpoint of Venus-Saturn as well as the new moon node. In addition, there is a Mars-Mercury square with Mars on the new moon-Neptune midpoint. Okay, what does that translate into? Inventiveness and flashes of genius are the hallmark of this Saros series. The individual will have intuitive leaps, insights, good ideas, visions, or vivid dreams. This newfound inspiration will pull the person away from his social life or relationship, thereby causing strain in the private life. This is a time when the person needs to be free, if only for a few weeks. Now, I understand it can be difficult to take something that is so generalized and then boil it down to how it might apply to the personal life. And I think the way to begin to do that is to see how these themes or this particular theme might be manifesting between now and the actual eclipse on April 8th. Now, we all know that the April 8th eclipse, well, maybe we don't know, but it's the follow-up to the 2017 Great American Eclipse because it likewise crosses over America. We'll talk more about that and the specifics of that, when we get to closer to that date. But again, these themes are starting now, right? And there's another way to look at eclipses, which is that and I think this is probably more relevant to how they affect us in our personal lives rather than the collective, but we can still, we can still work with two different cycles. I think we're complex. People are complex. I think we can do that, right? So it's going to be obvious closer to the actual eclipse, but the themes will really come into play around March 18th, which is about 3 weeks before the April 8th eclipse. So we want to look at between the energies that are going on between now and then, because theoretically, by April 18th, they may already have become manifest. And this could have to do with a whole host of things. But remember what I said earlier, the whole message of the transiting nodes is one for the collective, as well as many of us personally in need of it. So to move from the indecision of no answer is an answer and it's no, to making a choice is going to be prevalent for a lot of us. And given that we've got presidential primaries happening during this period, especially Super Tuesday on March 5th, there's a kind of, with Mercury, Mars, and Venus in Capricorn, there's a kind of the buck stops here when it comes to making decisions about future plans. And, there are also going to be a lot more legal decisions coming down the pike, especially related to elections, like who's eligible to be on what ballot, whether Trump is going to succeed in the E. Jean Carroll case, which was also very prevalent in the news yesterday at the Leo full moon when he testified, which thankfully was a very short testimony, but also, the Supreme Court deciding, again, the Jack Smith case about whether he can claim presidential immunity and therefore escape from trial, which is the most serious one after the documents case, which Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida has been dragging her feet on, which everybody assumes is because she is a Trump sycophant. But, also these two financial cases, as, again, we've watched the Sun-Pluto conjoin in Capricorn. That's very much about, like I illustrated with Nikki Haley, it's about business and it's about money, right? So this synodic cycle, the sun transits to the same point approximately every year. That's why you have a birthday every year, right? When the sun comes around, or solar return is a day maybe before, but the thing is the sun comes back to its natal position. Well, it's going to conjoin Pluto about every year because Pluto has an elliptical orbit, so it doesn't go regularly, but it'll be conjoining Pluto next in Aquarius, and for a long, long time in Aquarius for the next 20 years, right? That's why it's so rare that the sun conjoined Capricorn, because it's the last time in a very long cycle, because it's not going to happen again until Pluto goes back into Capricorn, which is, 230 years from now or whatever. So that rare conjunction has a lot to do with finances, other people's money, joint resources, power, greed, manipulation, all of the negative shadow sides of Pluto, but also transformation. So is the money going to transform Nikki Haley into the second runner-up, even if she remains there for the duration, but yet deprive Trump through a verdict of potentially $370 million in the New York Attorney General's case in New York? I said New York, sorry. Which supposedly is going to be decided by Judge Engoron, I'm sure most of us remember his name, in New York by the end of this month. I think it's February 8th that the Supreme Court is taking up. I'm not sure if it's the immunity issue or the ballot issue, the Colorado case. And now, I think it was on Wednesday, Maine, the Supreme Court in Maine has rejected deciding the case about whether Trump can be on the ballot or not there, although I believe they said they already went ahead and were printing ballots with his name. But, I might be wrong, but I think that's what I saw. However, The Supreme Court is bypassing the case in the state and remanding it directly to the federal Supreme Court. So those are two big issues. And then the E. Jean Carroll case, which may well, especially with this lunation square to Jupiter, Jupiter's expansive, right? May well turn out like Rudy Giuliani's defamation case brought by Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman in Georgia for Trump having defamed them. Giuliani having defamed them, not only leading to the case, not only after the case was filed, not only during the case, but after the case as well. And so the whole point there is that this may replicate itself, only this time through Trump. And, it's interesting because if we think about it, in Trump's chart, that Pluto, hang on, let me look for a second. I got it right here. Hold on. I get New Yorkie when I talk about from people from New York, like Donald Trump. 29 Capricorn is in his 5th house because Pluto is right on the cusp of his 6th house. So that conjunction, I've mentioned this before, that conjunction of the Sun and Pluto at 29:59 is exact quincunx, his natal ascendant, at 29:55. It's what we call partile in partile aspect because partile is the same degree even if it's a different minute. It also technically falls within the quincunx ratio to his natal Mars at 26:46, which is 3 degrees apart and a little more from that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, near the cusp of his 6th house. So altering the way that he appears to everyone in the outside world as Uranus stations retrograde. Station. I think I'm just going to shoot myself now. As Uranus stations direct tonight and tomorrow, revealing the facade behind which Trump has hidden. In large part, I've said this before, he is an excellent brander. That's really what he does best. He's branded himself as a billionaire, branded himself as a reality show, businessman, celebrity, branded himself as the Miss America guy, all these other things. And this is not true. And a lot of that was, he was capable of doing that because of the way he utilized his natal Mercury square Neptune, which is great at creating images. All right, so if you remember anything, remember that, because what we would, I think, most of us listening to this podcast would like to see is that he gets taken down. The final thing before I end is that Donald Trump, with his 2956 Leo ascendant, has his ascendant on the fixed star Regulus. I've spoken about this before. I'm not going to go into it again, but it's the kingmaker. But when the king uses diabolical means to hold on to power and hurts people that way, he will take the fall from grace. So that Pluto and that Sun-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, quincunxing his ascendant and his natal Regulus, are double signs that he's going to take a fall from grace. Okay, you heard it here. So thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Thank you for putting up with my flubs. And I hope you found the information presented helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on February 2nd for another episode of Karmic Evolutions Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come.